When a loved one passes away and you bear the responsibility of dealing with their belongings, it can be really stressful and time consuming and confronting. In today's podcast, we're going to talk about something we like to call sensitive house clearance and how it might help you in this situation.
So, Ingrid, we're going to get started in a moment talking about sensitive house clearance and what that entails and what it is to explain it a little bit more fully. But before we do, let's start on our new little segment, which is our reviews segment. And so we've started now to look at people who are very kindly leaving us reviews and talk about those reviews and what they mean to us and what they mean to other people as well, because obviously reviews, reflect things that lots of people think hopefully. So, Ingrid, let's read it out, the review, and then we can talk about it.
Yes, this is a review sent by EG, and she says, I discovered your podcast and it's so lighthearted, gentle, and funny. I would listen to a podcast and then carry out that contents clearing. I followed each podcast and over the months managed to clear the house of two-thirds of belongings. It was so emotional, baby clothes, etc. But it felt as though I was going to be okay because of all you both said in your podcast. So thank you for your support. Hope you're both keeping well and keep up the good work. Oh, no, it's just this, Leslie. What a lovely
Hmm.
comment.
Yeah, it's so nice. I think there's so much in there that's so relevant to a lot of people. I think, it's nice for us to hear that people consider it to be light-hearted, gentle, and funny, because that's everything that we set out to do. It's one of our missions right at the start when we set with the Declutter, wasn't it? We were like, let's kind of try to bring the light-heartedness and the fun factor back into decluttering because it's hard anyway. And just to have a little bit of fun along the way with it is a good thing, whilst recognizing that it's a very serious business alongside it. So thank you for recognizing and noticing that. That's really important. And congratulations on managing to clear your house of two-thirds of belongings that you no longer need. How amazing is that?
I know that it's a lot. It's like, wow, that is a lot. But I mean, it's just amazing that by listening to the podcast, she could do this and she's taken our advice on board. And of course, when we set up the Declutter Hub with this podcast, with the Facebook group, with our membership, we were hoping that people will go, you know what, actually, decluttering, yes, it's tough, but it can be fun too. And I want to learn something along the way. I want to change my mindset. And it's just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, so thank you so much, EG, for sharing that with us and us then sharing it with our listeners, which is also lovely. And keep those reviews coming. I think it's so nice, Ingrid, to get reviews because I think it's nice for us. Of course, it is. We always like hearing nice things. But I think the more important thing is to know that the podcast that we are recording, that we are broadcasting out there, are helping you guys to get towards your decluttering goals because that's what this is all about. So thank you so much for sharing. And of course, if you'd like to leave us a review, we would love to hear them. It's nice for us, it's nice for other people, and we can read it out on the podcast. So do pop into Apple Podcasts or your standard podcast player or on our website, declutterhub.com/, the number of the podcast, 249, this one. And leave us a review and let us know what you think and how our podcast has helped you. So, Ingrid,
Yes.
sensitive house clearance. I think we have some explaining to do because I feel that that's a term that I potentially made up myself. I'm not sure it's actually a term that's out there in the decluttering world. It's just something that I felt happened when I did a few jobs as a professional organizer, and I felt it truly encompassed the work that we did. And that's what we want to talk about today. So, what is, Ingrid, sensitive house clearance?
I think, Leslie, I think we need to set the scene a little bit first. So, what happens is someone passes away, the house is full of stuff, the house needs to be cleared, and then what? It's like people call us, don't they? Like in a bit of a state, in a bit of a panic for lots of different reasons. Maybe because they find it very hard, or maybe because they're all by themselves that they have to clear this house, or they do have family, but they live very far away. So it kind of falls on their shoulders. It feels a bit brutal to just call a company and go, right, well, my aunt's or my mom or dad's house, they passed away. Just clear it all and throw it all away. That's it's far too brutal. But then what? People are looking at this house going, oh my word, where do I even start? And this is all stuff that belonged to people that I loved.
I think it's hard because of various factors, isn't it? As you said, the ones that you've mentioned already. I think often there's a time scale involved. And so quite often, and we're talking, this is very much talking really about a scenario where you need to take action, not super quickly, but you need to move things forward because this is the kind of thing that can take months, if not years, to get through if you don't have a plan to
Mhm.
execute on something properly. So I think that's really hard sometimes when timescales are involved. If you've got the time to do this over several months or several years, then sometimes that can be a good thing. It can also be a negative sometimes as well. But I think timescales are very relevant here. I think, as Ingrid said, if you've got the responsibility, so even quite often in a family, even though there might be three siblings in a family, there's typically one or two that take the lion's share of the work. That might be geographical. There's many reasons why that happens. But often there's one person who it feels that they're probably the best person to manage the task or lead the task, let's say. So if that's you, but it's tricky because, people might be quite happy to go, okay, you do that with mum and dad, you do that, you do all the caring, you do all the looking after, you do all the shopping, all that kind of stuff. But actually, when it comes, I'm being really honest here, but when it comes down to pounds, shillings, and pence here at the end, that's when people start to sit up and take notice and then have an opinion on things that they have kind of often let you get along with for so long. I'm right. Yeah.
Mhm.
It sounds harsh, doesn't it? But
Mhm.
I can't consider myself to be quite lucky actually, because I'm an only child. And so I know that when I'm in that scenario, really, I don't have other people to worry about. And so I can just make decisions for myself and not have to worry about that. But when other siblings are involved or other people in the family, it becomes very contentious as well.
Mhm.
So we've got timescales that are a problem that force you perhaps into a corner where you have to do something much quicker than you would otherwise want to. We have family members who quite often cause a difficulty, or even if they're not causing difficulty, it's emotional for the people. So you might have this scenario where it's awkward and people are being a little bit self-serving. You might also have the scenario where everybody is on the same page, but some people find it more difficult than others. And then you've got the fact that every single item that you're going to come across is probably going to have some kind of sentimental attachment because it takes on a whole new meaning when that person has passed away, even if it's a functional item.
You said something interesting, Leslie, though, because you said, I'm an only child so maybe for me it's easier. But I think there's loads of people who actually can find it really hard when they're a single child because they suddenly feel they have to do all of this alone and by themselves. And of course, you're like a super organized person, Leslie, and I've known you for a very long time. So you're probably gonna go and you realize it's going to be hard and you know that it will, but because you're from nature very organized and you've got all these experiences and you know the charities and you know the outlets and you know what needs to be involved to get this project done. But I can also imagine that people who are by themselves go, I wish I had a brother or sister or somebody out there that could help me with all of this.
I think, I think that's an individual, as you say, I'm in the business of doing this. And
Yeah,
so I know how I would carry out that task. And so it's not straightforward from an emotional perspective. Of
yeah,
course, it's not, but it's straightforward from a practical planning perspective. And if I can then take out the kind of input from other people,
yeah,
then that takes that problem away.
yeah,
I'm not saying being an only child is easy because it absolutely isn't in those kind of scenarios because, I have. My mum died several years ago. My dad was still around. But I think when times are tough as an only child, you've got no one to share it with. And so you're the only one who has to deal with all of that. So there's a flip side to it. So
yeah,
there's kind of pros and cons to being an
yeah,
only child.
yeah,
But in this scenario, I think that just based on what I have seen with the way that things unfold in families, I've never seen a scenario where it's straightforward.
I know.
Um, do you know what I mean? And that's why, we've spoken about that many times where it's a good idea to have decisions made about this kind of stuff long before it happens, the kind of Swedish death cleaning scenario where you think about what you might want to leave behind and you make it very clear to those that are being left behind what's going to happen and what your wishes are. But I think if you've not done that, then people are just making it up and hoping for the best and talking about conversations that I had with somebody and said, "Oh, mum said I could have that." And somebody's like, "Did they?" Do you know what I mean? So it's tricky, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think as well, Leslie. I think everybody's got their own agendas and everybody deals with grief in a different way, and with the tasks that need to be done. And of course, you've got normally funerals that need to be organized, and you need to have then the house and the money and the paperwork and the whole estate of stuff. And there's so much to do. And I think when there's different siblings, everybody feels, I think, probably a different responsibility, feels that there may be different and good things that they can offer to the table. There's always probably somebody who kind of wants to take charge, but without really communicated really well with the other family members that are involved, and it can be quite contentious pretty quickly without because everybody is still suffering the loss of losing somebody. And how do you go through that? Because things have to be organized and sorted, whether you want to or not.
Yeah, and we're talking a lot about somebody passing away here, but it might be a situation where somebody is very much still around, but is not capable and can no longer have their home. And so
Yeah.
a scenario, there are many scenarios, and we're talking about
Yes.
siblings, and we're talking about the standard order of things where your parents die before you. That's not always the case, right, Ingrid? But
Yeah.
we also have dementia coming into play a lot more these days, where people are having to go into nursing homes and the house is there. That's even harder
Mhm.
sometimes as well, because you don't want to do things as if they've passed away. Do you know what I mean? This is complex. And our standard advice normally when it comes to dealing with people's belongings who have passed away is take your time and don't do anything that you don't want to do before you're ready because of the grieving process. But what we're talking about today with sensitive house clearances, if you have a scenario where you have no choice, where timescales are involved and that house needs to go on the market, some other things needs to happen. This is where
Yeah.
sensitive house clearance comes into play. So that's the scene. So now we need to talk about what sensitive house clearance is and how we think it unfolds.
Yes. So, I think what happens a lot is that, okay, let's just say somebody's passed away. The house is either a rental property and you've got just only a couple of weeks to empty the house, or due to circumstances, the house needs to be sold quickly for whatever reason. And you don't have a lot of time. You don't have months or years to do this. You need to have it done quickly. Like I said, there are companies out there who can clear the house for you. Here in the UK, they're called clearance companies. You call them, they come in with the truck, they take stuff out of the house and they either sell it, they donate it, they bring it to the tip for you, and lots of stuff happens. But they don't go through anything. They basically just empty the house. Basically, like when you move a house, people don't say it doesn't matter. We just box it up or we're going to move it from one place to the next. That's what happens with a clearance company. But when you want to do it sensitively, aka you want to go through things because there are certain things you can't immediately do there and then. There are trickier items in a house. One of the things you can do is hire a professional organizer, right?
Yeah, and that's what we wanted to talk about really. It's about, recognizing the task ahead with all of the things that we've spoken about and thinking, right, if the job here is to try and get the house sold as quickly as possible, maybe what I need to do is invest in having somebody to help me that's going to be able to do the groundwork. And this is what this is really, somebody that is sensitive that will do the groundwork for you. So what I worked for a client a few years ago. What we did, she came to me. She didn't have the option of moving her mum's stuff to her house. The house was too small. She was obviously going to take some key things, but in general, she couldn't start bringing boxes and boxes of stuff because she didn't have the space. The house had to be sold quickly. She was given the responsibility. I think she had a brother as well, but he was like, "You just do whatever." So I think he was overseas or something like that. So she had the responsibility. She was working full time. She needed to execute on this timescale. She's like, "How am I going to do this?" So what we did was we went in as a team of declutterers and we did the groundwork with parameters in place. And we're going to talk very much about how to set those parameters. The benefit of that is that you're going to get to your goal much more quickly. You're going to take out a lot of the really tough things, the repeated seeing sentimental things over and over and over again. And you're going to be able to get to a stage where you're just looking at some key pieces that you can make decisions on and not everything So I think it's really worth it for sure. It might not be a professional, it might be somebody else who's offered to help who could do something for you. It doesn't necessarily need to be a paid scenario. It could be a friend who's offered to help as well. But whoever it is, it needs to be somebody who has very, 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 and I can't emphasize this enough, clear boundaries, guidelines, and has got your best interests at heart. That's why professional is a fantastic idea, but a professional is going to cost money. I definitely think by getting a professional in, she could, the difference is she's still paying you're still paying a mortgage every month while the house is there, but you can invest that money from the mortgage into a professional organizer and move things forward a little bit more. So it's definitely worth thinking about as an option. Don't be scared. It's about getting the right person in place. That's what we're going to talk about. So it was really well done. So I think I had a team of people. I think there was 3 of us in the house. We took different rooms. We'd already predetermined what those criteria were. And then the client used to come at the end of the day. So this is one of those scenarios, very, very, very rare scenarios that as professional organizers, we worked independently. Most of the time, the client has to be there all the time. But she gave very strict criteria on what she wanted and was able to just come in for an hour or 2 a day to start making some of the more tougher decision on some of the items that we had said, these are the kind of things that you really need to look at. We're gonna empty the kitchen. You've already told me that you don't want any of your mum's crockery, or you don't want any of the food, or you want that to go to a food bank or whatever it is. So we had those criteria. And then actually we did use a house clearance company with the things that we were clearing, but we were just that middleman almost, Ingrid.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting. I think, you know, I was talking to somebody who I met for the first time over the weekend, Leslie, and I was just telling her all the different things that we get involved in and why our job is so interesting and why it's so much more than, oh, we're just going to put some stuff in a bin bag, right? And I think this is exactly one of the scenarios that we really make a difference in people's lives. It's the same when we are helping a client unpack in their new house. It makes such a difference. They feel at home much quicker. It's just one of the things that being a professional organizer, we work with so many different clients, so many different situations. And I think we really always have the client at heart of what we do and how we can help them best. And I think this is a perfect example of that as well. Like you say, we want the client there as much as we can. In this case, it wasn't possible because she was doing this around her job and about everything that she was doing. But you and your team made a massive difference to her for a job that she could have not done all by herself. You were like the perfect middle person and you could ask her all the questions, but then also have contact with the actual clearance company to do all the kind of the logging and the
Yes.
carrying and the lifting and while you could kind of categorize for her and kind of go, right, this, I think it's fantastic.
I think the
Fantastic
problem is
service.
sometimes all of these things, moving house, for example, moving house, selling a house, whatever, it's not for no reason that it's one of the most stressful things that we do, right? And so I just think it's the same as packing when you move in. Like, honestly, if anybody comes to me, I'm like, just get somebody to pack your house up for you. It's literally not that much money to do it compared to everything else that you have to do. Literally get somebody to pack stuff up because the alternative is just so long winded, isn't it? And, with
Yeah.
all, the problem is we go, it's expensive anyway. We don't want to spend any more money than we need to. But there are some things that I just think is a good place to kind of invest some extra money. And this is one of them. So we wanted to talk a little bit about setting parameters. And so we've talked about, because some people would be scared to death, right? About, I can't just let somebody loose in my house. Uh, they're just going to throw things away. And I know that there are some things around that I really want and stuff like that. So how are we going to, you know, get through that? And so this is going to be probably, so as professional organizers, when we do jobs with clients, we do a consultation and we set guidelines and goals and all of those kind of things. We're going to put these on steroids and go in and do a long consultation. Everything, every little detail is going to be written down into a project plan. And we're going to say, these are the kind of things, this is where it's going to go. This, and, get that signed off by the client to say, this is what happened. Maybe the client would then, if we did have a scenario where there were siblings, they would say, we've got a professional organizing company. This is what I've agreed. I've agreed that all the food can go. I've agreed that all the kitchen stuff can go. If they do see something that's more expensive or brand new in a box, that's the kind of thing that we would say, you know what, this might be better than the one that you've got at home. Let's have a look and you can make a decision then. But if it's just an old plate that's been there for donkey's years with no sentimental attachment to it, then that would be the kind of thing that just goes and gets donated to charity or whatever. So I think that the project plan is huge in this scenario.
Yeah.
A, to safeguard ourselves as professional organisers from not making an incorrect decision, and so that the client feels completely happy with what's going on. And I think trust is going to be paramount in this. So you have to have the right professional organizer that you trust to do the job well. And so I think it's different. This is an unusual. I've done about 4 or 5 of these in 13 years. This is not something that comes up with regularity, but I do wish more people did do it because I think it can be really helpful
Mm,
and it can, stave off some of that trickiness around this.
yeah.
So what kind of things do you think that you would want to talk about when you were doing this kind of goal setting, Ingrid, and the kind of project planning?
I think I would really want to get clarity about what kind of items I can expect to find, what is important, who do they want things in certain categories so they can go through it. If there's siblings involved, because everybody has got different things. So I think if there's multiple people involved, I would want to get clarity of each of the people or through the one contact person within the family, what are the certain items? Because what is special for one person might be not special for somebody else, right? So the key player in the family might say, "Oh no, everything in the kitchen can go," and then the other one said, "But I really would have loved to have Mum's blah 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 from the kitchen cupboard because I've loved it as I was a child." So I think you really need to have clarity about the key pieces. I think you need to have clarity about ornaments and photographs and paperwork and things like that. I think you have to have really good clarity about who is involved when, who gets the real clearance company involved, how are they going to book that, pay that, time frames? Do they want to come up to the house and all be involved, or is one person going to be the key? Is there going to be a WhatsApp group? There's quite a lot to go through and kind of figure out.
Yeah, it's a big plan because it's a big project, right? So to
Yes.
clear a whole house, I mean, we talk about decluttering in small manageable chunks. This is not something that can be done in small manageable chunks. This is something that's going to involve a professional organizing team and working with the volumes of the whole house, which is a lot, all in one go. So that's why, I mean, it's overwhelming for one person. We see so many people doing this, Ingrid, and it's just completely overwhelming and it can go
Yeah.
on for months and months and months
Yeah.
and be so distracting for someone. Because, we love doing that stuff. Most people don't, most people don't love going through people's stuff, whether that's food or clothes or whatever that might be. And then once you add the sentimental side into it, then it adds a whole other layer.
Yeah.
I think I just wanted to talk a little bit about the bit that you talked about where you talk about points of contact. And I think this is critical. What you need to establish at the beginning is yes, ideally you would want one point of contact, but sometimes it makes sense if you are going to update people or to update the whole family, all of the kind of key players in this. So I think that's important to establish that as well, like who wants what, and have you got if there are 4 siblings or whatever, do you know? Because there can be a scenario one, but oh, it'll be fine. I'll do it. But you might want to involve the others. This is where it gets tricky as a professional organizer because quite often we are party to kind of family mediation sometimes as well. We can only do what we can do, but that definitely forms part of what we're doing in these kind of scenarios. Whenever there's another person, even if that person is alive and we are decluttering with their mum, with their dad, whatever, we definitely have to work out as professional organizers who we need to communicate with effectively. Now, we're talking a lot about working with a professional organizer here, but you can do this yourself. So, all of the things that we're speaking about here, if you're doing this job yourself, you're doing it as a full family, these decisions need to be made anyway, even if you're not getting a professional involved. So, if you're doing that, set out, don't just jump in and go, okay, we're going to clear mum's house out Wednesday or whatever, and all jump in and hope for the best because you need to have a meeting to set this criteria up, maybe decide on where the contentious things are going to be, take those out straight away, potentially get that ironed out, and then go do the bulk of the work. So It is tricky, I'm not gonna say, and that's why I think it's sometimes useful to get somebody who has no sentimental attachment, who can be completely objective about this, to kind of mediate and be a middleman in it.
Yeah. Well, Leslie, let's go to a break because there's much more to talk about. So let's go for break and we'll see you soon. Hi, everyone. Welcome back after your little break. We are talking about sensitive house clearance. And before the break, we talked about a lot about the emotions and that it can be really hard to sort this out and how you can do this all. But let's go into a couple of more practical things. What are the things you're going to see and that you're going to come up against when you're doing this? And one of the things is, where is all the stuff going to go, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's good to, this is where you can really honor the person that's passed away. If they've got a charity that's very close to their heart, you can decide to do that. So quite often people, I don't know, pass away of cancer or something like that. And so it's nice then to use a cancer charity or something like that. So that would be the kind of thing that we would suggest, certainly as professional organisers, but often family members have already got somebody they work with. There will be loads of stuff. Donate as much as you can. That's what's really important. Work out the logistics of how that's going to be taken off the property. Can we take stuff to a food bank? Who's going to do that? Can we do tip runs? There are limits to how many times you can go to a tip. You can't go. I know it's different in every council around the UK. I don't know what it's like in other areas of the world, but we can't just keep on going like day after day after day. And if you're clearing out a garage and stuff like that, often you need to go day after day after day, right, Ingrid? And so those kind of things need to be thought about. So you might need a house clearance company. Is it logistically going to be easier to get somebody else to manage that, or have you got enough kind of manpower to do that yourself? So think about the practicalities of the exit plan. In a normal declutter, the exit plan is everything and definitely part of our process. And this is really important because we're talking about huge volumes. So when we are talking about bulk storage areas, garages, lofts, all of these things that we will come across as part of this project, we really need to think about those logistics and that exit plan, because that's when you come unstuck, isn't it? So you do all this decluttering, but all of a sudden you've got a backlog, like a kind of almost like a bottleneck of stuff. So we need to have the right cars, we need to have the right people that can help us, or we need to use somebody who does that for a business.
Yeah, or we need to order a skip, and that's sometimes, you can't normally we think, "Oh, we just call a skip and we've got a skip within an hour." They're busy, it sometimes can take days, so you need to be really organized with that. You might need to book a clearance company, you need to think about time frames and when I've got the right stuff for these people. Maybe if you're like, "Okay, I want a charity to collect a lot of this stuff," you need to book that. They normally also have a waiting list. They normally cannot come that week there and then. You need to book that in. Or maybe what we don't really have here in the UK, Leslie, is something called an estate sale. But I know that they do that in America. One of our members was helping her mom clear out her house, and she did an estate sale. And we're not really familiar with that, but we've read up on it and we've talked about our member about this. And it's what we do is that as soon as a house kind of has all the kind of important things have been taken by the family, then the rest gets sold off. And you can either do that yourself with garage sales, or you can hire a company to do this for you. And they stage everything around your house and they price tags on it. They have people coming around, they advertise it, and the company helps you by doing this estate sale. Less well known here in the UK. We do a lot with charity here, don't we, Leslie?
Yeah, I do wonder though, and it'd be interesting to know what it's like elsewhere in the world. So I'm pretty sure it'll be the same in Canada, right? But there's probably estate sales. And I think a lot of it might be to do with the weather, Ingrid. I just
Mhm.
wonder whether we don't have it, because a lot of these, garage sales and yard sales and all that, they happen because it's nice weather. Like we can't really rely on it not pouring with rain in the middle of our garage sale. Do you know what I mean? So I do wonder whether that
Hmm.
is because of that. We have car boot sales here, which is different, but that's everybody goes to a central point for those. I think people are starting to do more garage sales and things like that here, but they're just not that common, are they?
Mm-mm.
Um, I think, I've been talking a lot about, I've been talking about the sort of jobs that I've done, which have typically been where it's more like, there's very few things that we actually want of mum's stuff. We want the sentimental things, but mostly it's just functional stuff that was my mum's that I don't want in my house. Sounds very harsh, but you know what I mean? Like it's not your type of thing, and
Mhm.
that's quite common. Um, and of course, there will be some things that absolutely are, but I think, the estate sale scenario, we might be jump into a completely different type of house where there's a lot of very expensive items, a lot of antiques, a larger home, things like that. And so all of this is going to be very dependent on the type of stuff that's in a house. And
Yeah,
you know well whether or not the house that you're dealing with has got things that are going to be valuable from a cost perspective, and a sentimental perspective as well, or not, to be
yeah,
clear, whether it's
yeah,
just kind of just general stuff.
yeah,
So it's sorting all that kind of stuff out, isn't it? So let's go and talk a little bit about the practicalities of it. So we've made a decision. We've gone, right, okay, can't do this on my own. So I'm either going to hire a professional to do it, who's going to bring in a team, or it might just be one person. You can either be there with them or not. Okay. So the scenario that I was in was like, and that's why we brought a team in and we did it quite quickly, was that we had very clear criteria about what was going to happen. And then we offloaded that stuff out of the door. And then the client came back later on in the day after they'd finished their day's work and went through the stuff that we had set aside and said yes or no to those things. And as professionals, of course, we're used to knowing what kinds of things are sentimental. Okay. We see a letter, we see, even if we see a magazine that's an unusual kind of magazine, our minds will go, are they in the magazine or is
yeah,
someone special to them in the magazine? We're not just like, that's a magazine. And the answer is that it might not be special, but we would make sure that that was pulled out with a question mark over it, wouldn't we, Ingrid?
yeah,
And that's what we're talking about, sensitive house clearing. We're talking about somebody who knows the business of stuff, who knows what kinds of things are sentimental, and will pull those things to one side to just double check without just letting go of them. Of course, you're going to have scenarios where we're going to find things, hidden jewelry. We're going to find things that might be difficult. We might find, things that we know might be a difficult memory for somebody. So we will deal with those very sensitively when the client comes back as well. So there's all different kinds of scenarios. But ultimately, our experience of dealing with people's stuff over the years means that we will be more likely to be able to find those kind of things and pull them out to one side rather than a house clearance company that is just there to clear the house. It's a different remit at the end of the
yeah,
day.
yeah,
That's why I call it sensitive house clearance. Ultimately, what we're trying to achieve is that that house is clear, but we know there's a little interim step in there.
yeah, yeah. And I think, Leslie, so would you say start with things like food and toiletries? And I mean, you do need some cleaning materials left, obviously, but there's normally people have loads in their houses, right? We find the cupboards full of stuff. It's probably, the bedding, the pillows, the duvets, the blankets, all of those things are normally not super sensitive. If they're in a linen cupboard and then you suddenly see something that's smaller or with a certain pattern, you think, oh, that might be a special one. This is the one we're gonna put to the side and ask. So are those the categories that you would get started with?
Yeah, I think so. And I think even, talk about cleaning products and food, because that can be useful to
Yeah.
anybody, right? So you might make a decision, do you know what? My mum did have loads of cleaning products, so there is loads of food still in the cupboard. And yes, I am going to use that myself, or I'm not. I'm going to send that to somewhere else and I'm going to put it on recycle. Or cleaning products are a bit of a tricky one. So you need to make decisions on that. So things like bedding and towels and stuff like that actually is probably more straightforward because you can't really have more of the same. Whereas food, you can because it's going to start getting used and cleaning products are going to start getting used. So think about those kind of things in your project planning as well. Um, so yeah, I would probably take it. It doesn't really matter, but I think I would probably, as a professional organizer, probably work in a very similar way to the way that we do our roadmap. So I would talk about, I would do the kind of kitchens, bathrooms, practical things first, and then build up to things that are perhaps more difficult at the end, because this is not all going to be done in a day. So you can start with, again, even with your client who's going to have to make a lot of difficult decisions quickly, we can present them at the end of the day with things that are simpler at the beginning and then start to build up to
Yeah.
things that are more sentimental and more difficult at the end.
Yeah.
And so I think I would probably work in a kind of in a very similar way to we do our roadmap in the membership for the
Yeah.
same reasons, actually.
Yeah. It was interesting, Leslie, because actually I was talking, I went to my choir last Wednesday and I was talking to one of my friends and she was sharing that she was, um, sorting out or clearing her friend's house who sadly passed away. And she said, I just, it's so much work. and it really resonates with me now hearing, us talking about this. She really said, I can't even, and she even downsized already from a larger house to a flat, but still there's so much work to be done on top of organizing the funeral because that person didn't have any children. So it all falls to her and her family to sort her friend's house out. And, being already, of course, immensely sad that her friend has passed away, trying to do all of this. And she said, I still got the books to go. And I went, oh, yeah, it's a good thing you left that till later because that is a hard category to do. But make sure you check all the books because a lot of people put sentimental items in books, for example. So be mindful. So I gave her some tips and I gave her some ideas. And she's like, oh, I'm so thankful to just to talk to you and to talk through a little bit because it's a lot to take on, and she's retired, and her husband is as well. We all have, a lot going on, but basically she has time to do it.
I think it's so hard, and I think it's hard to do it yourself, and sometimes that's what's required, and we completely understand that.
Yeah,
But it just every item, when somebody's passed away, everything item feels like them. Do you know what I mean? And that's whether it's a really functional item like a towel or like some bedding or a pair of trousers, it takes on a whole new meaning because that person's now passed away. And you feel like you're doing them a disservice by doing something as harsh as to stick it on Olio or send it off to
yeah,
the charity shop. And you feel like you need to honor that person. But what we're saying is, there's probably several thousand items in a home and you can't honor every single one of those items in the same way. So what we want to do is we want to try and take out the things that are worthy of honor almost, don't we?
yeah, yeah,
And then if you can sort of do it that way, it makes it a little bit easier.
yeah,
It's tricky, really tricky. But just knowing what I know about how difficult people find it and how it just keeps on going. Do you know that's the
yeah,
problem with it? It's something that holds people back on getting to that next stage of actually
yeah,
putting the house up for sale, which is the next stage, right, with difficulty when you've got to go and people are looking at the house and picking it apart as they do and, things like that. So there's a whole load of stuff that comes after that, but clearing
yeah.
the house of stuff is the first part of it.
Yeah, 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 and then indeed, exactly what you're saying, Leslie. How are you going to get this house ready to be sold? Are you going to have it empty? Are you going to have just the furniture left, but no, food in the fridge? Because that if somebody lives in the house, you can't leave that all of that stuff, freezers, fridges, all of those things. It all needs to be dealt with, and how are you going to get to the next step of getting this property sold? And then all the paperwork that comes after that with the probates and all of that.
I think that, and I think that staging element of it, like how are we going to sell a house? Are we going to sell a house with stuff in it, with just furniture in it, with pretty much empty, but with a few key pieces. That needs to be set out in the project plan. Like
Yeah,
what's the goal here? Where do we need to get the house to? And then of course, once it's sold, there's going to be another push to get rid of the furniture or sell
yeah,
the furniture or whatever. So it comes in phases, but it's thinking that through. And I think a lot of people dread it, know
mhm,
that they've got to do it, and can only get, because of the grief, can only get as far as on Wednesday, we need to get started and get stuck into mum's house. And I think to try and have these difficult conversations and put this project plan together
mhm,
with your family members is going to be really helpful.
yeah,
Hard, but helpful.
yeah. And I think for us, the main aim here in this episode was just to really say there is help out there. There is, there are professional organizers that can help you. If even asking your friend feels an ask too big, it's something, because these are, this is not something that you can do can you just help me this afternoon for a couple of hours, If you're struggling by yourself or if your family is scattered all over the country, all over the world, and you feel like you're the one here, just know you do not have to do all of this by yourself. You can really have an ally with a professional organizer to help you with this. And, if you then do decide to take items home and you struggle with sentimental items, that's something you can then do later in our membership and go, how am I going to deal with all the sentimental items? But if you're pressed for time, spending this money on a professional organizer can be some of the best money you've spent also just to help you get through this and not let something drag on for years because it just eats so much of your energy away and your mental capacity. And, when juggling with caring and jobs and family and children and your house yourself, it's a full-time job on top of everything else. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to investigate your options. Know that you're not alone. And I think there are fantastic organizers out there who can help you on a local basis. And yeah, that's
Yeah,
what we wanted to talk about.
that is what we wanted to talk about. It's not
Yeah.
something we've spoken about before, is it? But I think
No.
it's something that's a really useful addition to a
Yeah.
professional organizer's portfolio and
Yeah.
that help you along the way as well.
Yes.
So,
I know. I'm interested to know from our listeners, has anybody dealt with having to sort out the house of a family member or of parents? How did that go? Did you find it hard? I would love for people to share a little bit of their experience if you're willing to. So leave us a comment. You can do that on declutterhub.com/249. There's a little comment section below on the page. You can leave us a comment and we read everything that you send us. Or maybe you are feeling inspired, or maybe this podcast has made you think and go, yes, I have been this has been on my mind. I've been dragging this. I've been procrastinating about this. I'm going to now, after talking to Ingrid, after hearing Leslie and Ingrid talk about this, I'm going to take action. We'd love to know. So thank you so much for listening today. And big one episode, Leslie, next.
I know we've got something special coming, haven't we?
Yeah.
We like to do something special when it's our, what do they call them? Keynote, not keynote, key podcasts. Don't know.
Yes. Um, I know.
We should know. We've got
I
to plan it.
know. Like special. I don't know.
Exactly. We've got a lot of work to do before we record that one, Ingrid, because we can't even think of what we might call it. So,
I know.
yeah, 250 is quite a big thing.
I
Isn't
know.
it?
Yeah, I can't believe it, Leslie, that we've actually managed to actually chat for 250 episodes, but we still enjoy it. We still love it. We still appreciate you listening in, week out. So come back next week for our big episode, 250th episode. Listen in.
Keynote or key mark. Key.
We'll think of something. But anyway,
Inaugural. No. Something special. I don't know.
anyway, thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.